Seraphina stood in the grand hall, her once majestic gown now tattered and torn, the golden crown she had worn as queen slipping from her fingers. She felt the weight of it in her hand, but there was no joy left in it now. The throne room of Xylor Prime, the very seat of power she had ruled from for decades, felt cold and foreign to her, as if it had never truly belonged to her. The marble walls, once gleaming in regal light, now loomed like silent, indifferent sentinels, bearing witness to the end of an era. Xeric, her husband, the mighty alien king, conqueror of systems, and ruler of galaxies, stood before her, his once loving eyes now cold and distant. His imposing form towered over her, his alien features twisted in contempt. His deep voice echoed through the hall, a harsh contrast to the warmth it had once held when he had spoken her name with affection. "You are no longer of use to me," Xeric declared, his words cutting through the silence like a blade. "A queen who cannot give me an heir is nothing more than a relic. You are expendable." Seraphina, her heart clenched at the words, the sting of betrayal sharper than any wound. She had been his partner, his equal, his queen. For centuries, they had ruled together, hand in hand. But now, it seemed, her failure to bear him a child had become the justification for her downfall. The throne room felt smaller with each passing moment. The nobles and courtiers who had once bowed to her with reverence now turned their backs, their whispers filled with pity and judgment. She could hear the murmurs, the quiet satisfaction of those who had always envied her position. Some were already imagining how they would claw their way into the king's favor now that she was gone. "Leave," Xeric ordered, his voice cold as ice. Seraphina's breath caught in her throat. She had known the risks, the price of failure in a world ruled by power. But to be cast aside, dismissed as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience, this was beyond even her darkest fears. "I have given everything for you," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "And this is how you repay me." Xeric's eyes flickered with annoyance. "You gave me nothing but disappointment. I am the king, Seraphina. The universe bends to my will, not the other way around." A cruel laugh rumbled in his chest, and he turned away, dismissing her completely. "Take her away," he commanded the guards at the door. "Her time is over." The guards, once loyal to her, now grabbed her arms with a force that stung. She could hardly believe what was happening. This was her palace, her home. How had it come to this? As they dragged her through the hall, her mind raced. The life she had known, the crown she had worn, the power she had wielded, all of it was slipping away. But somewhere, deep inside her, a fire burned. It had not been extinguished by Xeric's betrayal. No, it had only just begun to smolder. Seraphina knew that she would not go down quietly. This galaxy, this empire, had underestimated her. They thought her broken, but they were wrong. The universe had yet to see what she was truly capable of. The guards shoved her out into the cold, star-filled expanse of space beyond the palace gates. But as she stared at the vastness before her, something stirred within her, a whisper of something ancient and powerful. It was a sense of fate, a force pulling her forward. Seraphina's journey was far from over. She would rise again. And this time, the galaxy would feel her wrath. The cold winds of the barren planet howled across the jagged rocks, carrying with them the scent of something ancient, something forgotten. Seraphina stood alone on the desolate landscape, her boots crunching over the icy ground. The stars above were distant pinpricks of light, as cold and indifferent as the universe that had cast her aside. She had no allies, no throne to return to. Only the endless expanse of space, stretching before her like a vast and unfeeling void. Her exile had led her to this forsaken planet, an uncharted world known only for its forgotten ruins and its whispered legends. Legends of a power older than the galaxies themselves, of a force that could reshape the very fabric of existence. The locals spoke in hushed tones about an artifact buried deep beneath the planet's surface, something known only as THOR. The wind kicked up again, and Serafina pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, steeling herself. She had come this far. There was no turning back now. Her heart pounded with both fear and anticipation. If THOR truly existed, if the stories were true, it could be the key to her vengeance. The key to undoing everything Sarek had done to her. The ground beneath her feet began to rumble, a low vibration that set her teeth on edge. She stopped, scanning the horizon. It was then she saw it. A faint glow emanating from a crack in the earth, a soft pulse of light that beckoned her forward. Without hesitation, she began to climb down the narrow ravine, her hands gripping the rocky walls as she descended deeper into the planet's heart. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of ancient stone and forgotten power. At the bottom of the ravine, she found herself standing in a vast cavern, its ceiling lost in shadow. The glow was brighter now, pulsing steadily like the beat of a heart. And there, in the center of the cavern, lay a stone pedestal. On the pedestal rested a relic, a massive hammer forged from a metal unlike anything Serafina had ever seen. It shimmered with a faint ethereal light, its surface covered in strange, unreadable symbols. Serafina's breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was THOR. She stepped closer, her heart racing, as she reached out to touch the hammer. The moment her fingers brushed against its surface, a jolt of energy shot through her, filling her veins with a power unlike anything she had ever known. She gasped, her body trembling as the hammer seemed to come alive in her hands, its pulse matching her own heartbeat. Then, a voice, deep, ancient, and filled with untold power, echoed in her mind. "You have found me, Serafina of Xylor Prime. But do you truly understand what you have awakened?" Serafina staggered back, her breath coming in sharp gasps. She had not expected this, not this presence. The voice filled her thoughts, overwhelming her senses with its vast, infinite knowledge. "Who are you?" she whispered, struggling to maintain her composure. "I am THOR," the voice replied, the name sending a shiver down her spine. "I am an artifact of the ancient gods, forged to empower those with the strength to wield me. But know this, Serafina, I do not simply grant power. I change the very fabric of reality. The one who holds me must be willing to sacrifice all." Serafina's fingers tightened around the hammer. The weight of its power was almost too much to bear, yet she could not release it. It called to her, promising her the strength to topple the empire that had cast her aside, to confront Exarch and make him pay for his betrayal. "I will do whatever it takes," she said, her voice firm, though her mind raced with doubt. "I will not be weak again." "Then prepare yourself," Thor's voice boomed, and the ground beneath her feet trembled. "For what you awaken will change not only your fate, but the fate of the entire galaxy." As the words faded, Serafina felt the air around her hum with energy, the hammer glowing brighter, more intense. She could feel it, the immense power that THOR offered, the power to rewrite history, to reshape the galaxy in her image. But there was a price she wasn't sure she was ready to pay. Yet as she stood there, the weight of the hammer in her hands, Serafina knew one thing for certain. She was no longer the broken queen. She was a warrior reborn, and her journey had only just begun. The human colony on Darius 7 was a world on the edge, both literally and figuratively. It was a place of rubble and hope, a smattering of settlements scattered across an unforgiving desert landscape. The people here had lived for decades under the shadow of war, their homes battered by the constant skirmishes with invaders, most recently the forces of Tarek. The stars had always been their guide, but it was the earth they fought to protect. Serafina stood in the shadow of a crumbling outpost, feeling the weight of THOR in her hand. The hammer pulsed with a steady, almost comforting hum, the energy within it now as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. She had come to this place with a singular purpose, to teach humanity how to fight back, to show them that they had more strength than they realized. The human resistance leader, Captain Marcus Quinn, stepped forward, his face a mix of wariness and awe. His dark eyes scanned her, then the hammer she wielded. He was a man who had seen too much war, too much bloodshed, but even he couldn't ignore the power that radiated from THOR. "You're sure about this?" Marcus asked, his voice rough with the weight of the question. "You're telling me that thing is going to help us take down Xarek's fleet?" Seraphina's gaze hardened. "Not just take them down. We're going to send them a message." Marcus's lips twitched into a wry smile. "Well, you've certainly got my attention." She met his gaze with steady resolve. "Good, because we don't have time to waste." The wind howled across the barren desert as they made their way toward the hidden base, a fortress of stone and steel that had served as the Resistance's headquarters for the past few months. Inside, maps and plans were strewn across tables, and soldiers moved with purpose, preparing for the inevitable assault from Xarek's forces. But Seraphina knew that this time, things would be different. In the heart of the base, a large map of the surrounding space glowed on a holographic screen. Marcus and Seraphina joined a group of strategists, and the air in the room seemed to grow thicker as they began to discuss their next move. Seraphina's mind raced through the details. Xarek's fleet was advancing, closing in on their position. It was only a matter of time before they would be overwhelmed. "Here's the thing," Marcus said, pointing to a cluster of ships on the map. "Xarek's flagship is leading the charge. If we take that out, it'll cripple his entire fleet." Seraphina studied the map, her eyes narrowing. She could see the calculations on the faces around her, the cold, desperate precision of soldiers who had fought too long and too hard to back down now. "I'm not here to play defense," Seraphina said firmly. "We're hitting them before they even know we're coming." The plan took shape quickly, surgical, fast, and deadly. Using the human ship's speed and maneuverability, they would slip past Xarek's outer defenses and strike at the heart of the fleet. But it was Seraphina's role that would prove pivotal. With THOR in hand, she would board Xarek's flagship, and with its power, she would unleash chaos from within. The hours blurred as they prepared. Seraphina felt the buzz of anticipation as she stood beside Marcus, preparing for what lay ahead. Her hands tightened around THOR, feeling the energy within it surge like an untamed beast. She was no longer the exiled queen. She was a force that would reshape the galaxy's future. At last, the call came. "Time to move," Marcus said, his voice steady. The ships launched, their engines roaring to life as they broke through the atmosphere, cutting through the stars like a storm on the horizon. Seraphina felt the pulse of THOR in her hands as they approached Xarek's flagship. It was a massive vessel, black as the void itself, bristling with weapons and shields that made it nearly indestructible. But Seraphina wasn't intimidated. She had something far more dangerous at her side now. The moment they were within striking distance, Seraphina's ship broke formation, hurtling toward the flagship with breathtaking speed. In the chaos of the battle, the Resistance fighters fought bravely, their ships darting and weaving to avoid the enemy's fire. But Seraphina's focus never wavered. As her ship docked on the flagship, a sudden shock of energy erupted from THOR, sending waves of power coursing through the vessel. The force was like nothing she had ever felt before. She could feel a hammer vibrating with pure energy, and as the doors to the flagship opened, she stepped into the heart of enemy territory. This was the first strike, and it would be a message, one that would shake Xarek's empire to its core. Xarek's flagship loomed overhead, casting a dark shadow over the battlefield. The vast ship seemed to swallow the stars around it, its black, jagged silhouette a perfect reflection of the king who commanded it. The battle outside raged, human ships weaving and darting around like swarming insects, but they were little more than an annoyance to Xarek's overwhelming might. His fleet was as vast as it was merciless, an unstoppable force of technology and terror. And now, inside his flagship, Seraphina was about to confront the one who had betrayed her. As the metal doors hissed open, Seraphina stepped into the heart of the flagship's dark interior, her boots echoing against the cold, polished floors. THOR hummed in her hand, its power surging through her veins, making her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. The hammer felt like an extension of her body, its energy flowing through her, ready to be unleashed. The corridors of the ship were quiet, too quiet. It was as if Xerek's entire fleet was waiting for her. The walls, lined with gleaming silver panels, seemed to reflect her every move. She moved with purpose, every step a reminder of her transformation, from the exiled queen to the woman who would reclaim her destiny. She was no longer weak. She had become something else entirely. Ahead of her, the doors to the royal chamber loomed, guarded by two of Xerek's elite soldiers. Their armored bodies gleamed in the dim light, their eyes cold and devoid of emotion. They didn't move as she approached, but Seraphina didn't hesitate. The power in her hands was enough to render them obsolete. With a sharp, decisive movement, she raised THOR. The air around her crackled as the hammer's energy surged, and in a single, explosive motion, she threw it forward. The hammer collided with the walls, sending a shockwave through the ship. The guards were thrown back, their armor shattered as they crumpled to the ground. Seraphina didn't pause. She stepped over their fallen forms, entering the royal chamber without a moment's hesitation. Xerek was waiting for her. He stood at the center of the room, his back straight, his regal armor gleaming under the dim lights. His eyes, cold and full of contempt, locked onto her as she entered. There was no surprise in his expression, only disdain, as if her return was nothing more than an inconvenience. "Seraphina," he said, his voice a deep, rumbling growl. "I knew you would come, but I had hoped you would have stayed in your exile, where you belong." Seraphina's gaze burned into him, the weight of all her years of suffering and betrayal behind her eyes. "You thought you could break me, Xerek," she said, her voice low but steady. "You thought I would crumble, that I would beg for mercy. But you were wrong. I'm not that woman anymore." Xerek's lips curled into a mock smile. "You think you've become something more. You're nothing, Seraphina. You always were. Without me, you're lost. You're just a relic of a time long past." Seraphina's grip tightened on THOR. "I'm not a relic. I'm the reckoning." With a roar, she swung the hammer forward. The force of the blow shattered the floor beneath them, sending a shockwave through the chamber. Xerek was thrown back, his massive frame crashing into a wall. The room trembled, but he recovered quickly, his eyes blazing with fury. "You dare challenge me?" he thundered, rising to his feet. "I am the king of this galaxy. You are nothing without me." Seraphina didn't flinch. She stepped forward, the energy of THOR coursing through her like a storm. "I don't need you," she spat, her eyes burning with the fire of 1,000 suns. "This galaxy doesn't need you." With a guttural cry, Xerek launched himself toward her, his massive form hurtling through the air. Seraphina swung THOR, the hammer connecting with his chest in a flash of light and force. The impact sent Xerek crashing into the far wall, his body crumpling in a heap. For a moment, there was silence. Thick, heavy silence. But then, Xerek's voice came, rasping with anger. "You think you can defeat me, Seraphina? I am eternal." Seraphina stood tall, her chest heaving with the intensity of the battle. "No," she said, her voice filled with finality. "You're not eternal. You're just a man who was too blind to see the strength in me. And now your empire falls." She raised THOR high above her head, the hammer glowing with raw, untamed energy. It was time to finish this, to show Xerek that the galaxy had a new ruler now, one who would fight for something greater than dominance. And with one final, devastating strike, she brought the hammer down. The air in the royal chamber crackled with energy as the final blow landed. THOR, glowing with an otherworldly light, slammed into Xerek's chest, sending shockwaves through the entire flagship. The force of the impact shattered the walls around them, sending debris flying in every direction. The ground trembled beneath Seraphina's feet as she stood tall, breathing heavily, her eyes fixed on the crumpled form of the man who had once been her king. Xeric lay motionless against the shattered remains of the wall, his armor cracked and smoldering. A deep gash ran across his chest where THOR had struck, blood leaking from the wound, staining the floor beneath him. The man who had once ruled galaxies with fear now lay broken, his body a testament to the power of the very thing he had tried to destroy. Seraphina. For a long moment, there was silence. The only sound was the distant hum of the ship's failing systems. The walls groaned as the ship's power flickered, its systems struggling to maintain control. But none of it mattered to Seraphina. The galaxy had just been liberated from the reign of a tyrant, and in that moment, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. But even as the relief surged, doubt lingered in the back of her mind. She had struck the blow that had shattered Xeric's power, but what would come after? The galaxy was vast, and power vacuums were dangerous. Others would rise to fill the gap he left behind, some more ruthless than Xeric ever had been. The fight was far from over. As Seraphina approached Xeric's crumpled form, the air around her seemed to thicken, charged with the aftermath of the battle. The hammer still hummed in her hand, its energy strong, but now she felt its weight in a new way, a weight of responsibility. She knelt down beside him, her gaze unyielding. Xeric's eyes flickered open, his face contorted in a mix of disbelief and rage. Blood trickled from his mouth as he spoke, his voice a rasping growl. "You think you've won." He spat, his words thick with venom. "This is only the beginning. There are others, Seraphina, others who will rise, who will take what you've destroyed." Seraphina's expression hardened, her jaw set in determination. "Let them come," she said, her voice unwavering. "I will be ready." Xeric let out a bitter laugh, though it was cut short by a fit of coughing. "You think you can hold the galaxy together? You're nothing without power. You'll fall, just like I did." Seraphina stood, looking down at him. "I don't need power to rule, Xeric. I need something greater. I need courage." With a final defiant stare, Seraphina turned away from the fallen king. She raised THOR high above her head once more, the hammer's glow casting long shadows across the room. The flagship shuddered violently, the lights flickering. The power systems were failing, and the countdown to the ship's collapse had begun. Seraphina's mind raced. There was no time to waste. She had to leave before the ship was lost entirely. She sprinted toward the exit, her heart pounding with the adrenaline of the moment. As she passed through the corridors, she saw the devastation she had caused. Xeric's soldiers, lying unconscious or defeated. The resistance, led by Captain Marcus Quinn, had infiltrated the flagship, dealing with the remaining forces as the ship crumbled under its own weight. When she reached the docking bay, Marcus was waiting for her, his face grim but relieved. "Is it done?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Seraphina nodded, her eyes blazing with purpose. "It's done." "Then let's get out of here," Marcus said, motioning to the ships waiting for their escape. The two of them rushed toward the nearest ship, Seraphina gripping THOR tightly as they climbed aboard. The engines roared to life, lifting them from the dying flagship just as it began to break apart. As the remnants of Xeric's fleet began to drift into the void, Seraphina's gaze shifted to the stars beyond. The fight was far from over, but she had proven one thing. She was no longer the broken queen she had once been. She was a force, a protector of the galaxy, a force for change. With the vastness of space before her, she knew the future was uncertain, but she would face it head-on. There was no turning back now. She had found her purpose, and no one would take it from her again. The stars outside the ship flickered like distant beacons, the vastness of space stretching before them as the resistance vessel hurtled through the void. Inside the cockpit, Seraphina sat in silence, her hands resting lightly on the controls, though her mind was elsewhere. The battle was over. Xeric had fallen, and yet the weight of what was to come still pressed heavily on her shoulders. Beside her, Marcus Quinn leaned back in his seat, his face worn but relieved. The tense silence between them was filled with the hum of the ship's engines as they made their way to the nearby safe zone. But neither of them spoke. What words could there be? They had achieved the impossible, but Serafina couldn't shake the nagging feeling that their victory was just the beginning. "Marcus," she said finally, her voice steady but filled with a quiet resolve. "What happens now?" He glanced at her, his brow furrowed. "We rebuild. We rally the systems that were oppressed under Xarek's rule. There's a lot of work to be done, but with Xarek gone, we have a shot at real change." Serafina nodded, though doubt lingered in her chest. Rebuilding the galaxy was no small task. There were factions, warlords, and other powers waiting to take advantage of the chaos. Power vacuums never filled themselves without bloodshed. "We don't have the luxury of time," she said, her voice tightening. "There will be others like him. Others who want to fill the void, who will stop at nothing to seize control." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes narrowing in understanding. "We fight them too. But we don't fight like Xarek did. We bring people together. We show them there's another way." Serafina's eyes softened as she looked out at the stars again. "You really believe that?" "I have to," he replied, his voice firm. "If we don't, then everything we fought for, everything you fought for, was in vain." Serafina looked down at her hands, still tingling from the power of THOR. She had wielded it to strike down Xarek, but she knew the hammer alone wouldn't be enough to protect the galaxy. She wasn't just holding a weapon. She was holding hope. The hope of an entire galaxy desperate for change. Just then, the ship jolted and alarms began to blare. The lights flickered before turning red, and the voice of the ship's AI crackled over the intercom. "Warning. Incoming ships detected. Unidentified fleet approaching at high speed." Marcus's expression shifted immediately to one of concentration. "How many?" 24 ships. They're armed and closing in fast." Serafina's pulse quickened. She stood up, her grip on THOR tightening as she made her way to the cockpit's exit. "Get us ready for evasive maneuvers. I'll go meet them." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Are you sure?" "I didn't come this far to let fear stop me now," she said, her voice cool and determined. She stormed down the corridor, the hum of the ship's systems fading behind her as she reached the airlock. Her heart pounded in her chest, but the surge of power from THOR steadied her. She had no idea who was approaching, but she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just an ordinary fleet. This was a challenge. The doors to the airlock hissed open, and she stepped into the void of space. The cold, vast emptiness surrounded her, but she was undeterred. With a single motion, she raised THOR high above her head, feeling the hammer pulse with raw, untapped energy. The ships closing in were unmarked, their designs sleek and ominous, like shadows in the deep. In the distance, the ships opened fire, their energy blasts streaking toward her. Serafina's instincts kicked in, and she swung the hammer. A shockwave of energy erupted from THOR, sending the blasts careening off course, harmlessly scattering into space. Her eyes narrowed as the fleet drew nearer. She could feel the tension in the air, the raw power coursing through her. These ships weren't here to negotiate. They were here to take her down. But Serafina was no longer the broken queen. She was something more now, a force in her own right, with the power to change the galaxy, one battle at a time. With a cry, she charged toward the fleet, THOR in hand, her heart steady despite the chaos swirling around her. She would show them all that no one, not even the most powerful forces in the galaxy, could stand in her way. The rebellion was just beginning, and she would lead it to victory. The battle raged around Serafina, the void of space illuminated by the flashes of energy blasts and the streaks of weapon fire from the oncoming fleet. Her heart pounded with each blast, her senses alive with the force of THOR as she held it tightly in her grip. The cold vacuum of space felt strangely empowering, as if the emptiness itself was feeding her strength. She was no longer just a woman with a hammer. She was a symbol, a beacon of resistance against the storm that was coming for them all. The fleet that had come for her was formidable, sleek, advanced ships, their weapons charged and ready to strike. But they hadn't accounted for Serafina's speed, nor the unrelenting force of the hammer she wielded. With every blast they launched, she deflected it with a swift swing of THOR, sending the enemy's own fire spiraling off course and harmlessly into the cold emptiness. Serafina's ship was maneuvering at full speed, evading as much as it could, but she knew it was only a matter of time before they would be overwhelmed. The enemy ships were closing in on all sides, their formation tightening like a noose. But Serafina wasn't retreating. She wasn't even slowing down. She was advancing, cutting through the chaos with the purpose of a true warrior. Her eyes locked onto the largest of the enemy ships, a massive cruiser at the center of the formation. It was heavily armored, bristling with weaponry, its engines glowing with the power of 1,000 suns. She knew that if she could break through its defenses, she could break the entire fleet. With a fierce battle cry, she hurtled forward, directing all her speed toward the cruiser. The hammer pulsed in her hand, as if it too was alive with the thrill of the hunt. The enemy ships fired at her from every direction, their blasts lighting up the dark space around her, but Serafina was unstoppable. She twisted and spun through the oncoming fire, her ship's shields flaring with each hit, but she kept her focus on the target. The cruiser loomed closer, its shields crackling with energy. Serafina could almost feel the heat of its weaponry as she closed the distance. With a final, powerful leap, she launched herself into the heart of the ship's defenses, and in that instant, THOR came to life. The hammer collided with the cruiser's shield, sending a wave of shockwaves through the ship. The impact was deafening, a sound like thunder in the vast silence of space. The energy field that had protected the ship flared and flickered, and with a second strike, the shield collapsed. The cruiser's outer hull was exposed, vulnerable. Serafina didn't hesitate. She swung THOR with all her might, and the hammer tore through the ship's armor, sending debris and sparks flying. Inside, the enemy was scrambling, their soldiers rushing to contain the breach. But it was already too late. Serafina had broken through their strongest defense, and now they would feel the full wrath of her fury. She didn't wait for them to recover. She stormed through the ship, deflecting any fire that came her way, her every step echoing with the power of the hammer. The enemy was disorganized, unsure of how to stop her. They had underestimated her. They had underestimated humanity. Serafina reached the heart of the cruiser, where the command center was located. The air was thick with tension as she kicked down the door, her presence filling the room like a storm. The commanders, a mix of alien species, turned toward her in shock. She could see the fear in their eyes. They had come to destroy her, to crush the rebellion before it could grow. But now, they were the ones who would fall. "Your reign ends here," Serafina said, her voice steady, unyielding. With a final powerful swing, THOR lit up the room, the shockwave from the hammer's impact rippling through the ship. The walls trembled, and the command center's lights flickered as the energy surged through it. The enemy commanders fell, their attempts to retaliate useless against the raw power of the hammer. Serafina took a moment to steady her breath, her chest heaving with the intensity of the battle. Her ship was still holding off the rest of the fleet, but she knew this victory would not go unnoticed. The rebellion was only just beginning, and this was only one of many battles to come. But as she stood in the ruins of the command center, she felt something stir within her. Hope. Hope, not just for herself, but for every person who had been oppressed, who had suffered under the tyranny of kings like Zarek. This was only the beginning of a new era, an era of freedom. With one last glance at the wreckage around her, Serafina turned and headed back toward her ship, knowing that the fight was far from over. The storm had come. But now, so had the rebirth. The stars stretched before Serafina like a sea of endless possibilities. Her ship drifted away from the shattered cruiser, the debris of the battle floating in the cold, silent void. Behind her, the remnants of the enemy fleet limped away, broken and scattered. She could still feel the electric hum of THOR in her grip, its power now subsiding, but its presence in her hands was a reminder of everything she had overcome and everything that was still ahead. Her ship's systems were damaged, but they were functional, and the crew, what was left of the rebellion, was alive. That was enough. For now. As she sat in the cockpit, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead, she let out a slow breath. The ship's alarms had finally stopped blaring, and the tension in her body began to fade. But it wasn't over. It would never truly be over. Every victory birthed a new challenge, and every step forward meant more enemies waiting in the shadows. Serafina, Marcus's voice crackled over the comms, pulling her from her thoughts. We've lost contact with the other resistance cells. They're scattered, trying to regroup. But we've made a significant dent. You've given them hope. She smiled softly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Hope. But it's just the beginning, Marcus. There's still a long way to go. Marcus's voice was steady, filled with respect. I know, but they're already looking to you. They believe in you, Serafina. They want to follow you. Her fingers tightened around the controls, but she didn't respond immediately. The weight of his words settled over her. She had never asked for this, never wanted to be anyone's leader. She had only wanted freedom. But now, the rebellion had given her something else. A purpose, a responsibility that stretched beyond her own desires. I didn't come this far just to give up now, she said finally, her voice low, but filled with determination. We can rebuild. We will rebuild. The ship's AI pinged, interrupting their conversation. Captain, we have an incoming transmission. It's a priority message from the Outer Rim. Serafina's heart skipped a beat. The Outer Rim was home to some of the most remote, isolated systems in the galaxy. Systems that had been under the thumb of Tarek's regime for years. If they were sending a message now, it could mean they had something important to share, or they might need help. Put it through, she ordered, her voice steady despite the uncertainty. The screen flickered to life, and a woman's face appeared. Her features were sharp, her expression serious, but there was a glint of something else in her eyes, hope, like a flame just beginning to catch. Serafina, I'm Captain Ilara of the Outer Rim Collective. We've been watching your movements, and we've seen what you've done. You've broken the chains of Tarek's rule. And now, it's time for the galaxy to unite. We've been organizing the systems, and we're ready to join forces with you. We can end the tyrants, together. Serafina's breath caught in her throat. The Outer Rim Collective was a coalition of planets that had been living under Tarek's oppression for decades. They had stayed in the shadows, but now they were coming forward, offering their alliance. She looked at Marcus, who was watching her intently, his face filled with curiosity. It's time, she said, more to herself than to him. It's time to unite the galaxy. Without hesitation, Serafina turned to the comms. Captain Ilara, we accept your offer. We will bring the galaxy together, piece by piece, and we will fight for freedom, for every system, for every person who has suffered. Together, we will build something better. Ilara's face lit up with a smile, and Serafina felt a surge of pride. It wasn't just about defeating Tarek anymore. It was about creating something new. A galaxy free from tyranny. A galaxy united by hope. As the transmission ended, Serafina stood, looking out at the stars once more. The galaxy was on the cusp of something profound. And no matter the battles to come, no matter the sacrifices, she knew this was the path she had to walk. She raised THOR, feeling the weight of it in her hand. The hammer was no longer just a weapon. It was a symbol of strength, of rebellion, and of a future where no one would have to bow to fear again. The dawn of a new era had arrived. And with it, Serafina would lead the charge. The stars above burned bright, and she knew, in that moment, that they were no longer just watching. They were part of the story, and together, they would shape the galaxy's future.